Hello, and thank you for watching this presentation about navigating fundraising and development during COVID-19. Because as a fundraising council, Cogeo understands how deeply impacted your organization has been and will continue to be because of the COVID crisis. I'm Melissa, Cogeo's Director of Marketing, and I'll be introducing you to Cogeo as well as your speaker today, Rob Kusel. Cogeo is the company that specializes in 501c3 fundraising and organizational sustainability. Its work with client partners spans every sector within the nonprofit industry and geographical region of the United States. The Cogeo management team has 50 years of fundraising experience and has raised over $650 million for more than 150 nonprofit organizations. Rob is Cogeo's managing director and has worked at organizations such as Essex and Drake Fundraising Council, Blue Oak School, Stanford University, and his alma mater, Williams College. And with that, I'll pass it over to Rob.
Thank you, Mel. So let's start. Slide 3 really talks about the goals and context for today. And we're going to focus on 3 areas: evaluation and action plan, and then roles. Evaluation really provide the tools and a structured process to objectively evaluate your organization's resiliency and ability to navigate this challenging period, the pandemic. Action plan, provide a framework for an activity-driven plan of action prioritizing funding for your organization for the next year. And then roles, clear understanding of who needs to be involved and when to successfully execute the plan, e.g. board members. So COVID-19 challenges, realities aren't changing. This was a 2017 GSB, Graduate School of Business at Stanford University, a survey on leadership and management in the entire 501c3 sector. And it was a broad survey, covered every sector. The 2 most challenging areas, not surprisingly, are board governance, which is managing a board, and then funding, acquiring funding. Because those are really the 2 areas where you actually have to do something. And this could, and it's proving to be even more challenging during the pandemic. So there are things that need to be done to alleviate these challenges. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Slide 5. We're going to leverage again the House of Development, most of it at least. We're not going to talk about plan giving because that should be ongoing. Nor are we going to talk about a capital campaign or a transformational gift, but rather we'll focus on the core areas of fundraising that we know most of you who are listening are engaged in. So what you need to do is to evaluate your current status and then understand what the action plan needs to look like across 4 areas. The first is leadership, really around the board of directors, the executive directors, CEO, head of school, or the president. Individuals, retail giving, events, and then major gift, which is really high net worth giving. And then foundations and corporation, which make up most of the second floor. The next slide, first leadership. And really this should be done at a minimum on an annual basis and at a maximum every 3 years in terms of a strategic retreat to understand what are the strategic imperatives facing us in this given year or in the next 3 years. That then will determine the breadth of your subcommittees, standing subcommittees in particular, as well as ad hoc subcommittees. Now, these subcommittees need to be staffed. And the key is to ensure that you've got the right intellectual property, intelligence, professional intelligence, expertise from members of the board to properly staff the subcommittees that are going to be critical in solving the strategic imperatives that emerged out of the strategic retreat. Now, do you need a formal strategic retreat to have? No, you can basically have an administrative executive summit and then agree what those priorities need to be. But the full board committee generally looks like president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, then members at large, and then emeritus, who are lifetime members that can either be voting or non-voting. And generally, the chief executive is also part of the board as a voting member. Subcommittees we know exist for the most part. Standing committees are the executive committee, which was up top with yellow asterisk or orange asterisk, the Board Governance Committee, the Development Committee, the Finance Committee, and the Facilities Committee. Now, of these 5 generally standing committees, our trick question is which of the 5 is the most important by far? And I'll give you the answer once I'm done with the slide toward the end. Again, the question is, of the standing committees, which is the most important of the 5? And then the ad hoc committees are generally staffed by some board members, staff members, as well as other super volunteers who may have the intellectual property that's needed to accomplish the goals of the ad hoc committee. They're generally time limited. They're focused on a specific issue or specific tactical initiative, and project-based for the most part. And the answer to the question that I asked earlier, which of the standing subcommittees is by far the most important? And the answer is, it's the board governance. Why? Because they are the group who will be identifying and subsequently recruiting key board members incrementally who will meet those intellectual property challenges based in the strategic imperatives. So the answer is, again, board governance. Next slide. So we just talked about leadership. Now we need to evaluate what the development reality check is at the agency today in the middle of this pandemic. So first thing is really understanding your donor intelligence. How many qualified donors or prospects do you have in your CRM database? Are you able to segment your community so that messaging can be much more effective? And are you doing good record keeping? What is your CRM database? Is it Salesforce? Is it Blackbaud's Razor's Edge? Is it Blackbaud's eTapestry? Is it Donor Perfect Online? And there are many, many others. So the key is to manage that database well. And if you don't have a donor database, good news, Salesforce has a free product. They're arguably one of the top companies in the business, and you can get up to 12 licenses. And if you want to learn how to do that, just be in touch with us and we can help you get that done. The next thing you want to look at is how well formalized or developed are your house of development programs. And this has to do with individuals, both on the retail level and then on the major gift level. Foundations, what are your relationships with current funders, if in fact you are pursuing foundations? And are there incremental foundations which you could actually approach or gain triangulation into via super volunteers? And then businesses, corporations. Those are viable because obviously there's much more of a spirit today than ever in terms of engaging the 501c3 as an associated benefit to businesses. And I'll talk specifically about the 4 types of businesses that exist and the complexities involved in each of them, or lack thereof in some. And then also evaluating your current stewardship practices. We know that stewardship is a big differentiator in terms of donors, because most donors are giving to multiple nonprofits, and therefore they're getting various levels of stewardship from each of their gifts on an annual basis. And if your stewardship is excellent and better than your quote-unquote competitors, then you'll be at a higher advantage. So you really want to evaluate how well you're stewarding, particularly foundations and businesses, because that's what they're in the business of doing, which is ROI and measuring impact. Major donors as well. And don't underestimate retail donors as potential legacy donors in terms of leaving a will or a legacy. Okay, next slide. Now we're going to look specifically at each of the areas I just covered. So individuals, really it's 2 areas here. It's annual and membership giving, and then major gifts, which we'll speak about later. There's a good well screening product out there now, really, really strong. And we engage that with every one of our clients. So we do a complete well screen of their membership or their donor base and understand what the net worth of each entity is, as long as their net worth is over $1 million. You want to segment your database for mass engagement in terms of triaging so that the messaging actually meets the donor. And we call this donor-centric messaging. As much as you can segment, do. Assign campaign responsibility to various task force. Obviously, internally, there's going to be responsibility within the board. Plan these retail giving campaigns in terms of actionability. How many appeals per year? What's the target of each appeal? And we generally recommend that you have a specific ask toward a specific programmatic area, and then you can state impact points on what that will do. Today, actually, I'm not going to digress. I want to stay on task, but I have a really good example of an ask that was made today by my kid's school that was completely nebulous. It didn't have any of the key framework of the ask and just said, hey, we need green space. Help us procure. There was no number. So I'm going to help them out and coach them a little bit about that. And then once you execute these giving campaigns, generally by push-pull email strategy, once gifts come in, you want to steward them. And obviously, if they reach your major gift threshold, then you want to do individual follow-up so that you can unlock additional channels in terms of future donors, other donors that this particular donor might know. And then make sure that your stewardship schedule is really, really strong. And that should be controlled by the CRM system in terms of timing and execution. Now, if you're doing a push-pull email ask, then generally they come and give online, which then generally, if not always, means it'll generate a standard email receipt. And our point here is that's not good enough. That is not good enough. Because again, you're going against a competition, and at the very least, there needs to be a letterhead letter or an email even from the executive director or the director of development or the board chair that supplements the standard the standard messaging, no matter the size of the gift. But if they get a semi-personal, much more evolved than again the receipt that is generated by the email or by the donation transaction engine in this case. And notice in this slide and the subsequent slides, we've highlighted CRM, right? And there's a reason. Because without a great CRM and really, really good data, which is what we call clean data, it's very difficult to do these retail campaigns effectively. So make sure your data stays clean throughout and always updated. Take that as seriously as anything else that you might be doing, particularly if you're a one-person shop or a two-person shop. Next slide, we continue to speak about individuals as it relates to events now, right? And so the paradigm shift we've seen is the move to virtual, namely Zoom, or social distancing events, and I'll talk about that in a second. So cultivation events, which are great for major gifts, do work virtually. And the idea is to mirror offline systems, get a host or two, identify potential guests, and then do a, whether it's WebEx or Zoom, I don't want to promote any particular product, but do a standard invitation, engaging them to do this online. For example, my college rugby club is now doing a Friday evening beer practice through Zoom. It's absolutely hilarious. And so all these alums are getting on and having fun just chatting with one another. And it absolutely works well. Now for the outdoor, because we are still focused for the most part on being outdoors, what we recommend here are themed events, respecting social distancing guidelines. So a walkathon would be would be cool. With one of our sports clients, we're going to do a soccer golf tournament, right? Again, family by family, respecting social distancing and having set times that they show up and actually execute on their soccer golf experience. And here we have whole sponsors, businesses acting as whole sponsors for a set price. We have a tournament sponsor, and then obviously there's an entrance fee that mirrors mini golf, right? So think of what you might pay for your local mini golf, and that's the fee that we're charging. So I think it's $15 per adult and $10 per child. So it's not a huge raise, but it's incrementally, it's an easy way to raise several $1,000s, if not $10,000, $20,000, and all the while having fun and respecting the reality that is today. So walkathon, I think, is universally relevant. Jogathon, not as much because of the way that we emit in the particles in the air. But a walkathon, I think, would be absolutely appropriate for all of social services organizations, healthcare organizations today. People are looking for stuff to do, by the way, that's family oriented, and that would actually benefit many of your agencies. Make sure that once you execute the event, regardless of whether it's a virtual cultivation event or an outdoor themed event, same stewardship protocols as before, and make sure that all of the data that is associated with the event in terms of attendance, in terms of transactions, in terms of follow-up, in terms of stewardship, gets incorporated into your CRM database. The biggest workload in events is before the event and after the event. Execution of the event generally is actually a lot of fun, but we all know that it takes a lot of work. And by the way, we used to say before the pandemic that you really need to look hard at return on investment. In this case, not so much. What really needs to be evaluated is, are we engaging our donor base the way they want to be engaged, and are they having fun? And the money raised really is just incremental. The next slide, we move to the second floor. And let's talk about major gifts in terms of high net worth individual. First, let's just, again, remind you what the actual scientific protocol is for a major gift. And the formula that we use scientifically is 1/1000th of your development annual budget. So if in fact your development annual budget is $100,000 net, then a major gift would be 1/1000th of that, which is $100 a year. If your budget is $500,000, then a major gift would be $500. If your budget is $2 million, then a major gift would be $2,000. So that's the formula, and that's why a major gift threshold varies from agency to agency. So that's really important to understand. But once you've defined the threshold for major gift, then you've done your wealth screening as we've done before, then you'll have a really good idea of who's relevant within your current membership or donor population. Because the WellScreen engine that we leverage identifies philanthropic giving, size of giving, as well as areas of giving through these codes. So they really do a good job in terms of assessing who actually has the capacity within your own donor database or membership database of making a huge difference versus not having this data and flying through hearsay like in the old days. Second bullet, you want to manage your friends. This is an area where you don't get to pick your friends. The data that you get back is telling you who's going to be your friend, with whom you need to be friends. So Mel mentioned that I spent some time at Stanford University running major gifts, and every major gift officer was assigned regionally a prospect pool of 150 to 200 individuals, entities that she needed to manage in any given year. And so she didn't pick her, no, it was assigned to her, and she needed to make friends with those 150 to 200 individuals in her region. So that's the reality. We have not stopped meetings with our clients. They're still engaging in major gift work. They're doing it two ways, particularly now that we're in the summertime. One is they're going on outdoor walks, or they're meeting in an outdoor setting, Starbucks on a patio, where there's social distancing rules that are being respected. I did such a meeting, and I'm going to do it again this Friday, 2 Fridays ago, with one of our consultants here in Richmond, Virginia, and it went extremely well. And then we're going to do it again on Friday at 9:30, and we'll engage again in just a outdoor meeting. The other way to engage is obviously through Zoom or WebEx or any other platform, which can be as effective. Not as good, but it can be as effective. Once you've identified whom you're going to approach, make sure that you've got the right people involved in terms of engagement. The asks should always be made by a staff member, by an executive administrator, preferably the CEO, the executive director, or the president. But if a board member can join, or if there's another individual who would add value to the meeting, then be sure to engage properly. If you do have two people going, namely the CEO, executive director, and a board member, then there are roles being played here when the meeting gets executed. There's the ask role, and then there's a networking role. And generally, the CEO, executive director, president plays the ask role, which is, you need to invest in my agency. And the schmoozing and how's your family, and we really are grateful for your giving, that's done by the board member. And then again, stewardship, post-meeting follow-ups. Once you've made the ask, the key question to ask to unlock additional channels is, oh, Shirley, thank you for considering a gift to our agency this year. Now that you really understand through our case statement what it is we're up to, who in your network needs to be involved and have this type of meeting with us? And ideally, Shirley will have some interest in that, and over time would be able to network, triangulate into other donors. And because we do know scientifically that the only way, well, for the most part, the best and only way to new donors, incremental donors, is through existing donors in major gift work because of relationship and trust. And this is not something that Cogeo makes up. This came out of a study that was done, a longitudinal study that was evaluating the behaviors of major donors over a decade in Canada and the United States by Penelope Burke. And that's the key takeaway from the study was the only way to incremental and new donors is through existing donors. And then finally, of course, we come right back to stewardship. Make sure that you've got a really strong moves management schedule, which is to say this. If someone, let's say your threshold is $250 a year for major gift, you're running a $250,000 development budget every year. Let's say you get a $2,500 gift in, which is way above the threshold. And this is a new gift from a new visit from a new donor. And they decide $2,500 this year is what we're going to do. Well, what we recommend is that you take that $2,500, in this case $2,400 to make it easy, and divide it by 4. And every quarter, you send a note saying, by the way, the quarter of your gift, we were able to do this quarter because of your generosity. And then the next quarter, same timing, 3 months later, same thing. You put another touch on them. And then again, you do the same thing in the third quarter. And the fourth quarter, you ask for a meeting. Because at that point, you're anticipating, hopefully, that they will repeat their gift if it isn't a multi-year pledge, or even consider a larger gift for the following year. At that point, you negotiate what might happen, and then you repeat the cycle if the news is good. And then CRM is critically important in terms of high net worth individuals because you want to have really, really accurate data to make sure that anytime you're in communication with them, you will be totally up to speed on what past communication has looked like, particularly in this day of turnover. We just had, for example, a call early this morning with one of our major clients, and it turns out the executive director has decided to take a job in Atlanta. She's moving from Orlando to Atlanta after we just 2 months ago launched a $5 million expansion or renovation campaign. So these things happen, and you need to make sure that your CRM is clean so that when things like that occur, the person who's in succession has the most beneficial data possible to be as effective as possible out of the gate. Let's go to the next slide. Slide 11 is really around corporations and really thinking about how in this day and age to make the best possible case through corporations. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are 4 types of corporations, right? There's the limited liability corporation, which is generally one individual owner. And so that behaves much like an individual in terms of tax incentive. Then you've got the limited liability partnership, LLP, which is generally two or more individuals in joint ownership. The only caveat there is that it's more than one decision maker. It's several decision makers who will be in on making the decision. We recommend in LLPs that you approach one of the partners, who hopefully she can then disseminate it passionately to the other partners and consider it investment. Third type of corporation is the S Corp. And again, that's much like the LLC. It's just structured differently, but the tax incentives are similar. And then the fourth type is one we're very familiar with, is a C Corp. And that's a larger company, generally shareholder value. These, because they're larger companies, they generally have protocols and guidelines on giving. And in many instances, they even have a giving arm, a community relations team, foundation, an entire division, which is devoted. It's not big enough in most cases, but they do exist. That's devoted to community relations and funding in the community. That is more like a foundation. It's more process oriented, given that there's going to be cultural issues as well as associative ROI issues. And so you need to be very discerning in terms of whom to approach and et cetera. So, you know, some of the most popular giving programs, Target Corporation, they're very generous. And they have a very simple application protocol online. Most corporations are a little more complex in terms of understanding how to get through to them, but they are run by people. And it's very much, in a C Corp in particular, very hierarchical. So the higher up the chain you can get in terms of the management team, starting with the CEO, the more likely you'll be to procure an investment. And this is true for most C Corps. The next slide, foundations. So the first thing that needs to occur is don't make any assumptions that foundations will forever support you, because leadership, again, changes there, and there are certain paradigm shifts that occur, and we're seeing it now with this crisis, where there's been I don't want to say seismic shift, but a rather drastic shift toward aiding and really focusing on those agencies who are being instrumental in terms of frontline activities during this pandemic. However, ignore that, number one. It's data, and if you find that a foundation that was very relevant to you in the past has suddenly shifted its paradigm for the near term, acknowledge it, don't freak out, and just make sure that you keep them in mind for the future when things return to normal, from a standpoint of healthcare and other global issues. So make sure you do a thorough audit so that you understand whether or not they're still relevant, and if there are, through further research, second bullet point, identifying other foundations in terms of leveraging the Foundation Center online and finding synergistic foundations in your area that would actually, if approached or triangulated into, consider a proposal from you. Research can be daunting, so be sure to prioritize it. You might want to set foundation size in terms of their giving potential, so that you're not dealing with minnows. But make sure that they're relevant. That's the most important thing. Once you've identified foundations, but you also understand that their board of directors is not known to you or anybody on your admin team, be sure to vet the list of the foundation board members with your board and other past board members and super volunteers and connected individuals in the community. Because the idea would be to triangulate in to the foundation via individuals who may be connected and know each other. We do this all the time with our clients, and it works. If that's not going to happen, then you, the administrator, development director, CEO, should connect directly with the program officer. Again, if no relationship triangulation exists. And then once you've gotten all your everything in order, and you understand their protocols, then you want to submit the proposal, the application, and if in fact you're successful, then you really want to have really stringent stewardship practices, because just to remind you, foundations, their business model is to give money, and therefore, how do they evaluate beyond just the metrics of return on investment? How do they evaluate their fundees? Well, the way by which they're actually keeping them up to speed on what their investment has done and why they've improved because of their investment, and how the community has benefited, particularly if there were restrictions on the investment from the guideline, in terms of where the money needed to be spent. And again, this is relevant with CRM. You want to track everything. Who's the program officer that you're dealing with? When was your last conversation? What was in that conversation? But really, it's copy pasting emails and email strings to make sure that all of the data is kept, secured, and will be relevant for additional incremental employees or people that might succeed you. The next slide. We talked about creating leadership earlier on. Now is really, how do we get the board to engage? Right? That's always a challenge, as we found out from the 2017 Stanford earlier, the Graduate School of Business. Managing a board and fundraising is the most difficult, or at least challenging thing. And then you have to remember also that board members are volunteers. Now, they're super volunteers, but they're still volunteers. And for the most part, they have other jobs, families, etc. This is your full-time job, and therefore you are responsible for making sure that fundraising targets are being met. They're not. And so when we hear somebody or a CEO or an executive director tell us, my board won't fundraise, no. It's you're not doing the right thing in terms of getting your board comfortable to do relationship management, because fundraising, quote unquote, and development work is really an extension of managing relationships and eventually getting them to consider investing monetarily or in other ways. So it's not the job of the board, it's not their responsibility. Their quote unquote job is to assist, is to engage, and make sure that they are actually doing some of the things that need to be done. So what can you do to get your board comfortable and really optimize their capacity and their ability to engage properly in the House of Development, across the House of Development? So really it's about engaging them, right? So in terms of annual giving and membership giving, it would be doing some stewardship if they actually know the donor, to make sure that they're thanking them as well. And really, for the event, it would be attending the event and leading by example, and really doing the right thing. Major gifts we talked about. It's really just understanding their own networks, doing an analysis of the well screening to make sure that we get additional information, as well as joining the executive director on meetings where relevant, where they would be value add. Foundations, it's really looking at board of director lists once that is put forth to them by the administrative team, if in fact there's synergies. And then businesses, corporations that we talked about earlier, again, it's relationships. Do they have relationships that could be meaningful and could help engage those types of businesses that I described earlier on behalf of the agency? And then stewardship, it's really just, again, value add. If they provide value add, we ask them to consider augmenting on the current stewardship by doing a thank you note. And by the way, we can write those for them, and all they have to do is sign it and send it, email it. If in fact you're in a major gift campaign, annual major gift campaign, or a capital campaign, they need to engage. They need to engage at whatever level they're comfortable in whatever capacity they can. And also in terms of subcommittee work, if in fact there are some subcommittees that are relevant to each and every board member, be sure they're staffed with them. And then ad hoc subcommittees, great way to test future board members in terms of bringing them onto an ad hoc subcommittee. See if they actually do the work, and then you'll know their behavior as they become vetted to the real board. Same with advisory boards. That's another great platform to groom and understand what the efficiencies and capabilities of any individual might be as you're considering them as a potential leader, particularly if they've expressed an interest, right? And then if you really want to be diligent, have accountability, real metrics, which is what we impose on our clients, right? Something like this. Every board member needs to bring 5 individuals a quarter to the development committee. And individuals could be an entity. It could be a corporation. It could be a small business. It could be a foundation. It could be a friend. It could be whomever. Work colleague. That would be a metric. Another hardcore metric, which we see particularly in opera houses, and would be give and get policy of $25,000 a year. Right. So if you can't give $25,000 yourself, let's say you give $5,000, you got to go get the $20,000, and you could start as low as $500 a year, give or get. Given again, what's your major gift threshold? At these fancier urban opera houses or metropolitans, they've got massive budgets. Therefore, they have to have really high net worth boards, just so you understand the dynamics there. That's generally the correlation with museums and other performing arts centers and things like that. But make sure that you have some type of system in terms of accountability, because otherwise it's going to fly. Because again, the only area that board members really have to do stuff, they have to act, is in board governance, in terms of making sure you're recruiting, identifying the right people and getting them engaged, and development, which is moving people and entities around. That being said, I want you to look at your last board meeting agenda, and I want you to be flat out subjective and objective about where development was placed in that agenda. And then I want you to consider putting it at the very top of the agenda in future board meetings, so that one, it does several things. One, it will demonstrate to the board how important business development is. Okay? Every corporation, when they do their annual meeting, that's what they look at, numbers. It's all about the numbers. And so this is the same thing. It demonstrates to the board we take development seriously. The second reason is most board meetings, unfortunately, occur in the evening when people are less fresh. And so by bringing development to the top of the agenda, you'll have them at their freshest. And therefore, they're most focused. 3, the other thing we see is generally development's at the end, because nobody wants to do it. And therefore, the people will have left maybe because they don't want to be around for development. The people are tired. They may not be as focused. The meeting time may be running out. Therefore, they rush through the. I think everybody understands. So, if you can, we highly recommend that you consider moving development to the top of the agenda, and you will see. I don't want to say dramatic change, but you'll see a change. It'll be very powerful. Okay, the next slide, number 14. This is a case statement description. Now, go to cogeo.us/case as it's demonstrated. You can get some really good examples. Very eclectic sample. There's nearly 20 of them, I think. And they're highly eclectic. And we're talking about every sector of the industry. But you'll see how each case statement operates, despite the various missions involved. And once you've read 4 or 5 of them, you'll notice, oh, okay, I see what they're doing here. And I see the presentation style and the effectiveness of this. And so what will you see? You'll see mission, you'll see history overview, you'll see quality of the program, community involvement, which are enumerated. You'll see funding needs and execution timeline, generally in a major gift program over a 1, 2, or 3 year period, depending on whether or not you're in a capital campaign. You'll have funding opportunities and their impact, then who's involved, key leadership, bios, partners, sponsors, and then lots of quotations and pictures, as you'll note. And again, just on your own time, go to cogeo.us/case, and you'll sample some very elegant examples, all of which were done in partnership with our clients. And the production was done by Cogeo in Portland, Oregon. The last slide, and again, this you'll be able to access through the library, which Mel will talk about after I'm done here with this slide. There's some great free resources that have been put together by the Cogeo marketing team as it relates to leadership, fundraising, execution, and then many others. Regarding leadership, I mentioned the board matrix earlier. We also had a really good webinar around board of development training. Fundraising execution, how to conduct a major gift ask. It's a really good overview. Foundation outreach checklist. Are you really prepared to do your outreach? Retail giving webinar, major gifts webinar, and then corporations and foundation webinar. Very similar to what you just heard, except much more specific and granular around each of those areas. And then in the other area, we've got case statement, and here you'll be able to see what the content template looks like, as well as our new sophisticated design template. I mentioned earlier that we highly recommend Salesforce CRM, which is free for all 501c3s as long as you apply and are accepted. And then you can also access a real sample development plan. If you struggle with creating your own business plan, this is a good one. And then if you're interested in chatting with us, again, we're not trying to sell, we're just trying to help. You can schedule with Mel a whatever minute consultation surrounding any issues or challenges that you might be facing where you would want some advice. So thank you, Mel. I'll pass it back to you to close it out.
Thanks, Rob. And yes, viewers, please take advantage of these resources. We're very excited to be able to offer these to you for free. As Rob mentioned, we understand that the links aren't available through the video, but we'll make sure that the slides are nearby or attached so you can access these resources. So thank you again for watching, and we wish you nothing but the best during these times. And thank you, Rob, for your time.